All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the July California Nevada Drought Early Warning System Drought and Climate Outlook webinar. Thank you for those that have joined us previously and those that may be joining us for the first time. My name is Amanda Sheffield, and I'm the Regional Drought Information Coordinator for NIDIS in California, Nevada, affiliated with the Cooperative Institute for Research and Environmental Sciences at CU Boulder. This webinar is co-hosted with the California Nevada Adaptation Program, a NOAA CAPRISA team. And we've designed these bi-monthly webinar series to provide the region with timely information on current drought status and associated impacts, as well as a preview of developing climatic events. Before we get started, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and you'll find that link in the chat already, and I'll put it in later at the end. And on there, a recording and a brief summary will be available on drought.gov, and then the recording on our YouTube channel later this week. We've got a great set of speakers this week. They're covering the current conditions and outlooks, a recent seasonal prediction research, and new developments in the field of drought and public health. Before I get started, let me just cover a few things here for those that don't know much about NIDIS yet. NIDIS's mission is to improve the nation's capacity to proactively manage drought-related risk by providing those affected with the best available information and resources to assess their potential for drought and thus better prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. We work to improve our understanding of how and why drought affects society, the economy, the environment, and improve accessibility, dissemination, and use of early warning information for drought. We work with new and existing networks of federal, tribal, state, local, and academic partners to make climate and drought science information available. We do this through several different drought early warning systems, which includes California, Nevada. They have a lot of activities such as under observation and monitoring, planning preparedness, prediction and forecasting, research, and communication outreach, such as webinars just like this. Real quick, I was looking to see what would we share from information and news. One thing I wanted to point out for folks is just a little showcase here of drought.gov again. For those that may not have seen this last time, I want to mention where, for example, you could find latest news on new research, events, other things, where in this middle arrow here is where you find past webinar recaps, so such as where the webinar, where this one will go. But also mention that you can sign up for NIDIS emails here. Unless when you register, if you've gotten emails from us before, you're on our listserv. But if this is your first webinar or someone forwarded this to you, at signing up for the webinar, there's a box to check to stay on our listserv for going forward. But if you didn't check that box, you won't automatically get emails from us in the future. So that's why I wanted to flag for folks. You can go to this QR code or go to drought.gov and look at sign up for NIDIS emails. And from there, you'll be able to sign up for the listservs and opt in. We don't want to opt in anyone if they don't want to be. So we do this step. And just want to flag that for you because otherwise you won't automatically get sent the recording from this webinar. But also wanted to note for you that on this sign up page, if you take that link I was just sharing with you, you can sign up for all the different regional lists if you're interested, all the NIDIS newsletters, as well as where you can get local drought alerts. So here on the left, for example, you can sign up for your city, your county, your state to be alerted when the U.S. Drought Monitor change happens or when the drought outlooks are released and updated. So if you'd rather not have to check the U.S. Drought Monitor map every day and instead you want to get an email, this is also some place, for example, for you to sign up for those. With that, I'll kick it over to our great speakers. As I mentioned, we have 3 speakers today. The first is going to be Joe Casola. He is with NOAA NCI. He is the Western Regional Climate Services Director, and he'll be covering the Drought and Climate Update and Outlook. After that, we're going to have a presentation on subseasonal prediction sourced from the tropics research from Jiabao Wang from CW3 at Scripps. And then lastly, Summer Woolsey from the University of Nebraska Medical Center will present on some recent work on a drought and public health roadmap, as well as messaging research for public health providers. With that, Joe, I'm going to go ahead and pass control over to you.
Great, thanks, Amanda. And hopefully folks are seeing my screen. Okay, so a quick summary. The drought monitor shows virtually no drought in the region, and we'll take a look at that. It's kind of stunning relative to where we were several years ago. But there are some climate stories to share. Certainly the record-breaking heat we've seen, especially in kind of the interior regions of California and throughout Nevada. And there's also been a lot of fire activity to start off this summer. We'll take a look at the outlooks for at the 8 to 14 day time period, as well as the monthly and seasonal outlooks. And I'll conclude by talking a little bit about the state of ENSO and where the forecasts have things heading. So first, the drought monitor. You can see for California and Nevada, really the only spots as of last week's release are a tiny fraction of D1 up by the Oregon border, about less than 1% of the total land area. So some areas that are experiencing dryness kind of throughout the Sierras and northern Nevada, but for the most part, not much to talk about in terms of the drought monitor and drought categories. Taking a look back, I'm going to show kind of temperature and precipitation since the water year started on October 1st, as well as for the last 30 days. So this is the water year picture, and you can see at left are the temperature anomalies in degrees Fahrenheit. At right is precip as anomalies as a percentage, and most of the area kind of warmer than the last 30 years, which is quite common. These days, just kind of it's hard to beat the trend of global warming, with an exception of kind of the coastal area in Southern California, probably getting pounded by some of those atmospheric rivers during the winter, is still a little cooler than average despite some of the recent warmth. And you can see the temperature, I'm sorry, the precipitation picture at right shows, I would say, not stunningly dry, with a few patches of some pretty large wet anomalies kind of along the southern half of California on the coastal areas. And before we get into the 30-day picture, I just want to say what that sets up is a fairly rosy picture for water storage. So at left, the teacup, or not that they don't have teacups for California, sorry, just the kind of reservoir amounts across the state of California. You can see a lot of places are either at or above their historical average. Again, something we probably have not seen through a lot of the last 2 years. And then at right are the teacups for the Colorado River system. The top panel is the upper Colorado. The bottom panel is the lower Colorado. You can see that some of those smaller reservoirs in the upper part of the Colorado system are pretty close to capacity. Lake Powell is only at 42% and Lake Mead is at 33%, but together this is a pretty substantial improvement from where things were the last couple of years. I do think it's interesting though that even with kind of 2 back-to-back decent snowpack years, it's not like we're filling up Lake Mead and Lake Powell together. There's been improvement, but they're still, below half of their total capacity, which is pretty massive. It could be, I think their total capacity of the Colorado system might be somewhere in the neighborhood, at least comparable to the annual stream flow of the Colorado. So you wouldn't expect to fill those up in just 1 or 2 years. But just for perspective, I think it's important to see that we're I would say, not totally out of the woods with respect to Colorado River system storage. Okay, kind of moving ahead to the more recent past, for those of you who do live in the region, I'm sure this is no surprise. I've shifted the units here. We're looking at percentiles because if we just did anomalies, I think we get kind of all of one color. So at the left is temperature, and you can see a lot of these percentiles are above 90th percentile. And this is actually a longer period of record, not just the last 30 years, but more like the last 50 years. So we're really experiencing kind of June and July have been some of the warmest conditions observed. At right is the precip. It actually hasn't rained a lot in the southern portion of the region, but just this is a dry period of time. And so that's why I decided to show percentiles. So you're often kind of close to median, even being dry in a dry month. It's not kind of a big deviation. If I had shown the absolute numbers, you'd see a lot of brown, but it's dry through most of the region. So nothing really stunning on the precip story for the last month. Even though we have kind of very little going on in the drought monitor, it's not to say that there aren't climate impacts. And so this is a bit of a collage. In the upper left, these are daily temperatures for June and July in Las Vegas. And the blue bar is kind of what actually happened. The green is where the normal high and low would be. And then the reds and the blues are the records. And you can see kind of really since the beginning of June, the temperatures have been well above where the normal range would be. We really only have a couple of days where the high and low would both be in the normal. Broken a lot of records, especially the kind of period right after July 4th and then this past weekend in Las Vegas. So really kind of long duration, very intense heat. And the lower right-hand picture is just a photo from the news showing someone suffering on the strip. And then I've got two images of fires. In the upper right is a fire near Oroville, California, the Thompson fire. It's been a very busy, and then the lower left is the incident map from Cal Fire. It's just been a very busy start to the summer for fire activity. This map is just the little fire icons show where fires are active, but that 270,000 acres burned, that's I think close to double, or maybe I'm sorry, a little more than double what the 5-year average is for acreage burned at this point in the season in California. So the fire crews have been quite busy. In some ways, our fire activity is a product of having a relatively wet winter where you have the ability for a lot of green up in the spring, and then these above average temperatures drying things out very rapidly. Okay, shifting to look to the future, to the outlooks. So these images are the 8 to 14 day outlooks, and you can see the region is mostly red, leaning for above average temperatures. Again, it's hard to beat the trend. These maps are often red for most of the country. The precip outlook, you see kind of leaning below, less than normal. However, we're talking about a period of time where there's not much precip to speak of. You do have kind of near normal for a lot of the southwest monsoon area. It hasn't really gotten off to a great start, so we'll see if that can start to pick up in the next couple of weeks. But I kind of take the precip forecast for this time of year with a bit of a grain of salt. As far as the hazards outlook, this is actually kind of an interesting one. I haven't seen a map that I think looks like this in a while, but this shading shows a slight risk for high winds through most of the west, which is probably bad news for a lot of these fires that have already been going, as well as any kind of ignitions that occur. So I think it's something to keep our eye on, especially for those that live near active fires. Going for the monthly picture, you see a lot of red for the country, leaning towards warmer than average temperatures for August. And at right, you see a similar picture that we saw for the 2-day outlook, 2-week outlook, where kind of leaning towards below average rainfall. And this one does kind of leak into the monsoon region, and those are places, given the heat, I think it's really important for us to keep an eye on. Does the monsoon really get off to a start here in late July, or do we continue to see relatively dry conditions? Then for the seasonal outlook of August, September, October, you see a lot of the above average temperatures, although interestingly, you see equal chances along the coast. And I think this has been a kind of consistent representation of maybe some very near coast below average SSTs, kind of keeping the coastal areas maybe a little cooler than the interior. And then the seasonal precipitation look, again, a very similar kind of blob of perhaps drier than normal conditions for a lot of the interior Southwest. The drought outlook continues to be relatively rosy, I guess, for a lot of California and Nevada. Some areas of drought development potentially in Northern California and Northern Nevada, as well as perhaps some of the dry conditions in Arizona kind of moving a little bit westward. And I think that represents or reflects some of that seasonal outlook that perhaps the monsoon doesn't really deliver a ton of rain this particular year. One other thing to look out for is the Northwest. It's an area where there is a lot of drought activity. They have significant heat right now, and where it might affect the California, Nevada area as well as the rest of the West is, does this have a significant impact on late summer, early fall hydro production. If we're warm in the Southwest, then kind of need those electrons, and will there be kind of enough in the Northwest to supply that, I think is an important question. To my knowledge, and others can fill in, there haven't been any grid issues with some of the last heat waves, but I think that the more perhaps time to bite one's nails is at the end of the summer and the early fall, when flows tend to be lower along the Columbia. The fire potential outlook picture, shows kind of elevated chances for August, September, and then in October it's reduced to just the Southern California area. But I think for those, the white areas don't mean that you're free of fire. It just means you might be at average risk, which is still pretty high for this time of year for a lot of California especially. So I think we wouldn't, there's nothing here to suggest that the busy start to fire season would in any way abate, that I think that kind of continues. So now shifting gears to talk about ENSO. This is the kind of a numerical representation of the Ocean Niño Index, the ONI, which is NOAA's official metric that they use for declaring El Niños, and each kind of running left to right are different seasonal averages, so a 3-month average of the ONI, and then top to bottom are different years. And so you can see the El Niño that we had last winter, rather, kind of started in the late spring and persisted throughout the winter. Now we've shifted, you can see the April, May, June ONI, the last ONI where we have a full month. We are safely, or whatever, if you want to consider El Niño not safe, we are in the neutral territory, so we are officially in ENSO neutral conditions. However, looking forward, we're starting to see, and this is a map of SSTs in the tropical Pacific, that kind of telltale La Niña cold tongue extending off of the west coast of South America, and a lot of the forecast models are calling for a La Niña to form. So these bar charts are the kind of percent chances for each of the subsequent coming, imminent 3-month periods. What are the probabilities of having La Niña neutral or El Niño conditions? So these blue bars show us that we have kind of an elevated chance of La Niña conditions, and it probably emerging in kind of the early fall. The August, September, October probability is at 70%. You get close to 80% for September, October, November. So that said, there's still, even with 70 and 80% chances, kind of a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 3 chance that we might be neutral. So I don't want to, exclude the idea that we could have a neutral winter, but right now, kind of where it is officially a La Niña watch, and the expectation or the anticipation is that we have would be shifting into La Niña conditions in the early fall. And with that, I will turn things over to the next speakers, and happy to take questions in the chat as we continue. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Joe. There was one quick one that maybe this will be better to do now than at the end of the rest of the questions. Is someone said, could we back up a bit to the wind screen and talk a little bit more about this? It's something they've been interested in years. I didn't know if you want to add any details to that particular part, why I changed things.
Why? I'm sorry. Why they change things?
Oh no! While I change things.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Got it.
Before I change things to the other people, I wanted to see if you wanted to bring that up again real quick for like a minute or two.
Yeah, and so actually, I don't have much to add to this. This is just kind of the probabilistic hazard outlook from CPC, and yeah, they just kind of have a large area of elevated chances of high winds. I would speculate that this is just kind of having some big areas of high pressure can give you some perhaps embellished or larger than expected gradients in geopotential height that would give us the setup for some strong winds. But that's kind of all I have, and I'm happy to point you to the CPC folks if you have more questions specifically about what justified them of putting this into the outlook.
Okay, great, thank you. And if you have anyone else's questions for Joe, keep adding them to the chat and or in the questions box, I mean, and we'll get to them in the end. After that, we'll move on to our next speaker on their seasonal prediction forecast work.
Hi,
you can see your slides. You should be...
Yeah, is everyone
able... we can see your slides. I think you're good to go.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so this is Jabba Wan. I'm a researcher at C03E at UC San Diego. I'm glad to present today talking about the sources of subseasonal predictability. And for the research results I will be showing in today's talk, those are coming from 2 recent papers. I'll put in the link into the chat after the talk. If you have more interest in more details, please feel free to check them out. So this is a flow chart I get from DeFlorio et al. 2021 EOS article, in which they made a nice discussion about the different sources of the predictability and the water management decision needs across in the different lead times, from the shortest lead time weather time scale from daily to weekly, and to S2S of seasonal to seasonal time scale, which is the main focus of today's talk, that covers the time period from 2 weeks to 2 months, and the longer lead time from annual to even climate time scales. And it has been recognized by the research that the Madden-Julian oscillation is a dominant source of the physical process that impact the predictability within the S2S time scale. And the decision making is mostly about the reservoir management and resource positioning in the S2S time period. And this is usually what we use as the motivation of the continuous investment to S2S research, that this figure compares the forecast scale versus the prediction lead time, where across the different time scales I just mentioned. So for the weather time scale, you can see that we have pretty high scales in the first few hours, but as the lead time increases, that the scale rapidly decreases. And for the longer time scale from seasonal, longer to 2 months, we also have a relatively high scale there. But between the weather and the seasonal time window, the S2S, we have really low scale there, and what we call it as the prediction desert. So this is really motivated us of the tremendous international and national effort to put into this area to try to understand what can help to improve the prediction in this time scale, which is also important for decision making. So with the years of research that it has been recognized that Madden-Julian oscillation, MJO, can be used as a useful information for the subseasonal prediction. And here I wanted to introduce the main characteristics of this phenomenon. I'm showing animations of the precipitation to the left and the circulation to the right, which is essentially the 2 components of the MJO. So it is a unique convection circulation coupled system in the tropics that for the precipitation, which is basically the convection component, it shows the eastward movement of the convection in the tropic from the Western Indian Ocean to the Pacific. And then if you look at the upper level circulation to the right, then it also suggests that the MJO has a large spatial scale, that although the convection is more refined to confined to the tropical region, but its circulation can all go into the higher latitudes and modulate the weather and climate there. And most importantly, that the MJO itself is oscillating within the S2S time scale that has a life cycle of approximately 30 to 60 days. So one of the reasons that the MJO can be considered as a source for the S2S predictability is because of its broad global impact, what we also call it as the MJO-tetic connections. So the MJO can affect the mid-latitudes by generating the propagating raspy waves from the tropical region into higher latitudes, where you see the shadings there, that the waves can go into the North Pacific, North Atlantic, or even the more downstream regions. And those tetic connections can further modulate the climate modes and the weather events, such as the Amazon rivers, precipitation extremes, blockage regions, and etc. So in addition to the significant impact from the MJO on the globe, that is high potential to be predicted in the S2S timescale, there's also another reason that we can use it as the source for the predictability. And here I'm comparing the MJO predictability. What it means is that the longest lead time that theoretically the models could predict the MJO, and the actual prediction skills in dynamic models, if there's biases in models, that the prediction skill, how it compares with its theoretical limit. So the gray shadings are indicating the predictability. Theoretically, that the MJO could be well predicted about 5 to 7 weeks ahead. But because the models are having the biases in capturing the initial conditions and the following involvement of the phenomenon, then the actual prediction skill is actually just about 1 to 4 weeks. It is 3 weeks behind its predictability. So this is suggesting that we still have a large room to further increase the skill in the MJO prediction. And that figure is using the data produced in 2009. For the figure I show on the upper top right is having more updated results that are comparing the MJO prediction skills in the current dynamical model systems that we are using. And I wanted to highlight 2 models there. One is ECMWF model, the blue line. It is the European model, and the other is green line, the ENSA model, US model. Those 2 models are producing the real-time MJO forecast that we usually use in our real application. And the ECMWF actually right now has the highest MJO prediction skill. It's about 4 to 5 weeks. And then for the figure on the lower right, I'm showing the evolution of the MJO prediction skill in that in the ECMWF model, starting from the past decade to the most recent decade. And the different colors of the lines are representing the different thresholds to quantify the prediction skill. But all of them are showing the same message, that there has been a gradual continuous improvement of the MJO prediction since the last decade. It's about 1 year, 1 day per year increase for the MJO prediction. So this is suggesting that we still have pretty promising, although a large way to go, but it's promising that the with the continuous effort, that the prediction skill of the MJO itself has been increasing a lot. And then here I wanted to introduce one very useful operational diagnostic tool, that the MJO phase diagram. This phase diagram, it condenses the different information of the MJO forecast that we need into one single diagram. So here I'm showing an example of observed MJO activity during January to March 2023. You can see the different colors of lines there. They're representing the different months. And on each line, it has the different state marks there. So that is indicating the date, showing the date and the location of the MJO convection. And because of the eastward propagation feature of the MJO, that we are going to read this diagram clockwise. In addition to the location information, this diagram also tells us about the amplitude of the MJO. For example, for some of the days in January, the red lines there, they fall into weak MJO category, which is within this little circle there. And for some of the other days, most of the days are outside of the circle, where we consider as the strong MJO cases. So in real application, we only consider the MJO impact when they are strong. But the MJO itself, I wanted to point out that itself still exists every day in the tropics. It's just a matter of if it's having a strong amplitude or not. So the MJO can be divided into 8 phases depending on their propagation location. And here I'm showing the spatial pattern of the MJO convection, that's the blue shading or the purple shading indicating the enhanced convection. So when we talk about the MJO phase 1 and 8, we mean that now the enhanced convection is over the Western Hemisphere in Africa. And when we say the MJO moves to phase 2 and 3, it means that the convection is now propagating over the Indian Ocean. 4 and 5 meaning that it further propagates eastward into the maritime continent. And 6 and 7 meaning now it is over the Western Pacific and Central Pacific. So this is a phase diagram that usually we can see from the MJO forecast produced by the current dynamic model systems. And then I wanted to briefly talk about my recent research that we have been looking at the combined impact from both MJO and ENSO on the wintertime compound precipitation and temperature extremes. And what we found is that the ENSO play a significant role in modulating the MJO impact on precipitation and the temperature. We found that ENSO can either modulate the magnitudes of the canonical relationships or even a change in the sign. So for the first bullet point there, I am showing an example from MJO 6 and 7 that the shadings in the figures are indicating the frequency of the compound extremes. If it's blue color, meaning there is an increase in frequency, and the brown color, meaning a decrease in the frequency. And the dots are suggesting the significance. So I'm comparing between the MJO only impact, the figure on the left, and the MJO plus El Nino, strong El Nino impact, the figure in the middle, and the MJO plus strong La Niña impact, the figure on the right. So if you compare just middle and the right figures, you can clearly see that it changes in the magnitude of the response there, that if the MJO is coupled with strong El Nino event, then taking Southern California as an example, the increase in the wet cold extremes are largely more significant than the MJO only impact. But if there is a La Niña occurring together with the MJO, that you see nearly no impact there. So if you look at the general circulations that come with that precipitation response, you kind of can easily understand from the pattern there. So in the shadings in the bottom panel, they're indicating the trough and ridge conditions, and the vectors are indicating the moisture transport. So if you compare the middle to the right, you can see that if there's strong El Nino, then the MJO tidal connections tend to be weaker, but it actually extended more eastward into the south coast, U.S. south coast, leading to more significant impact there. However, if the MJO is coupled with strong La Niña, then although the tidal connection pattern amplitude seems to be stronger, its position is actually more offshore. So the U.S. West Coast cannot feel too much impact from the MJO. So for the changes in sign, I'm showing examples from phase 4 and 5 when the convection of the MJO is over the maritime continent. Again, comparing the three different conditions of the MJO as well as the El Nino, La Niña states. So if you compare the middle to the right, you can see that if the MJO is over the maritime continent, we tend to see a widespread decrease over the entire western U.S., but the response can be opposite if the MJO is coupled with La Niña. And it can also be easily understood from the general circulation patterns I show in the bottom panel that in El Nino state, the MJO tidal connections actually featured a ridge that stays near the U.S. West Coast, leading to the widespread decrease or dry conditions there. But if it's La Niña, it's replaced by a weak trough, so this will lead to more increased moisture transport and hence the opposite response in the same region. So those results are suggesting the significant modulation from ENSO to the MJO precipitation relationship, but as a two-way interaction, the MJO itself can also interrupt the ENSO impact on precipitation. So here I'm taking water year 23 as an example. We know that water year 23, we had a pretty strong La Niña event, and we were expecting another dry year over California, but we ended up having a wet water year 23. So these are the figures from the Florio et al. 24 BAMS article that they made some discussion of that case study. So this figure is about the California drought condition at the beginning of the water year and by the end of the water year. If you compare them, you can see that the extreme drought conditions were pretty much relieved by the end of the water year. And that was because there was a series of back-to-back ARs that made landfall over those regions. And in this paper, they were focusing on the period from late December to January 23. And I was also looking back at the same period of the MJO activity. What we found is that in late December, the MJO was having pretty strong amplitude and residing over the maritime continent. And as we were heading into January, the MJO actually made a transition to the phase 6 and 7, where it moves to the Western Pacific. And then we examine the historical relationships of the AR frequency and extreme precipitation, trying to understand what is the historical context of the impact from those phases. The top panel is for AR frequency and extreme frequency after MJO phase 4 and 5, and the bottom is for 6 and 7. So if you compare those two figures, you can clearly see that historical relationship is actually suggesting a transition from dry period over California because of the decrease in AR frequency and a decrease in extreme cases during further phase 4 and 5 into a wet period from 6 and 7. So this suggesting that the observed activity of the MJO during that period is consistent with what we expect from the historical relationship and leading to an active period of the ARs afterwards. We were also summarizing the statistics of the MJO activity during the water year 23, and we found that the number of strong MJO days was actually within the top 25 percentile of all the past water years. So this suggesting that the water year 23 was actually a very quite active MJO activity year. And the phase 6 and 7, which favors the wet condition, had the highest occurrence frequency since water year 1980. So those might be the one of the contributors that lead to the wet water year 23 back then. So lastly, but I think most relevant to the audience in this webinar is I wanted to advertise that the great team effort that we have been putting into that our center are generating the weekly, subseasonal, and the monthly season outlook that summarize the latest SOS forecast results that are developed or co-hosted by our center. And we are also working together with DWR stakeholders that between the winters, those outlooks are further refined to include their feedback to try to accommodate the needs from the end users. And here I'm showing the pictures of the team members and also a screenshot of our website for the previous outlook that we produced in the last water year. And also please stay tuned for the upcoming water year that usually the first outlook would be coming out in early November. So to quick summarize that the MJO is considered a prominent source of SOS predictability because of its pronounced impact on astrotropical weather and potential predictability and SOS lead times. In the interest of time, I'll be leaving the rest here, and I put my contact info there and the website of our SOS group. And thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Great. I don't see any particular questions on this right now. And so with that, I'm going to pass over to Summer for our third presentation.
Thank you, Amanda. All right. How does that look, Amanda?
Perfect. Go ahead.
All right. All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Summer Woolsey. Thank you so much for having me on the webinar today. I am the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for the Water, Climate, and Health Program at the University of Nebraska Medical Center's College of Public Health. And today I'll be talking about two projects. The first one is a nationwide drought and health assessment that my colleagues at UNMC and NIDIS completed, as well as a new tool for healthcare and public health practitioners that our team developed as a result of some of the findings of that assessment. So I'll actually start here with the Drought and Health Roadmap. So what you're seeing on this slide to the right is the cover of the Drought and Public Health Roadmap for Advancing Engagement and Preparedness. So this document was authored by my colleagues over at UNMC, Dr. Jessie Bell, Rachel Lookadoo, and Keith Hansen, along with the really stellar team over at NIDIS, Amanda being one of them. And this document was the culmination of 4 years of work and outreach efforts. And the purpose of this document is to inform and direct future efforts and investments in the space of drought and public health. So in order to bring together stakeholders and assess the needs and gaps regarding the state of drought and health across the nation, the Roadmap team hosted a national drought and health summit. They hosted 5 regional drought and health workshops. So what you can kind of see on the right here are those 5 different workshops that you can see were kind of across the nation, the attendees, and there were different topics based on region. And then finally, our team also facilitated virtual interviews with local health practitioners from across the nation. So asking different public health practitioners what they knew about drought and health, where they were in that work, and then what was needed, what were those gaps in order to develop this. So this is a pretty quick presentation, but I'll give some of the findings of some of these efforts. So throughout each of these areas, there were 4 primary focus areas. So the first area that we really saw a lot of feedback on was partnership and collaboration, communication and outreach, interdisciplinary research and applications, and planning and preparedness. And I'll go over some key findings in each of these focus areas. Here we go. So under partnership and collaboration, the Roadmap team, through those the health summits, through the interviews, through the workshops, found that there was a nationwide need for a drought and health community of practice, so a place where people who are interested to gather and share. There was a need for bringing people together on the issue. There was a need to expand public health representation at drought-related meetings, so not just hydrologists and folks who are concerned about environment only, but also folks who can speak towards the public health impacts of drought. There was a need for increased adoption of early warning systems, so shout out to DEWS for that. And then also there was a need to incorporate drought into vulnerability and community health needs assessments throughout the nation. Under the communication and kind of outreach branch of this, there were expressed needs for developing impact communication resources, tailoring communication tools for vulnerable populations, increasing drought and health resources for different health departments, and also utilizing federal agency websites to share resources. So the second document that I'll talk about here today is kind of in response to some of these needs, but we'll circle back to that. And the kind of third focus area that came out of some of this work for interdisciplinary research and application was the need to improve understanding of drought indicators, conducting a comprehensive review of past drought events was mentioned, understanding how drought impacts private wells. So I'm from Nebraska, a big amount of our population is on a private well. And then also the need to address barriers to data access with regards to drought and health. And then in the final kind of focus area with regards to some of the feedback and some of these outreach efforts in planning and preparedness was the need to incorporate health impacts into drought vulnerability assessments, utilizing tabletop exercises for drought events, engaging with tribal nations across the nation, and then creating a sample drought and health questions for community health needs assessments. So just to quickly put there, Amanda will put the link to that, that actual assessment in the chat. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is one such tool that our team has developed in order to start addressing some of the needs found within that document and kind of where my part of the story comes into play as well. So what you're seeing on the screen here is the cover of a new tool designed to help public health practitioners and healthcare providers across the United States communicate the health impacts of drought. So this document was developed by myself and then the team that helped with the roadmap as well. And it ended up being a 22-page tool that has 3 key sections. So based off of feedback that we received on what type of tool is needed right now and what would be of best use right now, we kind of landed on where we're at right now. So inside this tool, we have 3 key sections. So the first section provides a very high level overview of what drought is and its health impacts. So for example, if you're a healthcare provider that does not have a background in health and you've never heard the term environmental exposure before or something like that, this really gives you enough information that you need to feel comfortable as you are developing your own messaging and making your own recommendations around the health impacts of drought. And then the second section here describes key partnerships needed to develop in drought response. So as you're communicating things, who do you need to be working with in your community to make sure that that messaging is effective? And then the third section is a series of messaging maps that will give recommended messages based on an area's current drought stage, so D0 through D4, along with examples of what that messaging could look like in your community. We also included key tools that readers can use to learn more about drought and health, and if they want to go into more of a deeper dive to really kind of learn about some of those impacts, we have that there too. So these are some pages from the tool's background section, so which we give an overview of drought. So we'll define drought and then also how drought can cause those exposure pathways or secondary impacts as we use here in the document that can lead to those negative health outcomes. So really giving, again, that really good broad background on it. So if you are a public health practitioner or a healthcare provider and you are developing this messaging, you have a good background, a solid foundation on which to stand. So the images here show 3 pages out of the document, and this is some messaging guidelines that public health or healthcare, public health practitioners can use whenever developing their actual communication plan. So the first page right here, you can kind of see all the way to the left here, gives some risk communication tips. So kind of best practices and things to think about as you are building your communications plan and thinking about how you are going to talk to your community or talk to your patients about the health effects of drought. So things like repeating key messages, often you hear that so much in communication because it's mission critical, really, is repeating these things that people need to know, making sure that you're using plain language, thinking about translation, using graphics, just kind of best practices when you're thinking about health communication. And then what you'll see below that is actually very specific messaging and specific recommendations on how someone could find their current drought stage. So again, D0 through D4 all the way up to the exceptional drought. One thing that you see in the research is as droughts become more severe, the health impacts become more severe. So each of these messaging maps follow along with that. So let's say, for example, you'll see on the second page, if you're a public health practitioner and your area is in a D3, D4 drought and you want to start building some messaging around these impacts, you can go specifically to this message map and kind of look at the different health impacts that are associated with that stage of drought and what are some of the things that you can kind of say. So a message map is a tool used a lot in any health communication field where you take a key message, so what's the main point, and then build supporting information around that. So you'll kind of see that there with those bullet points to the side here, just getting more information so people kind of know, A, how does this even happen? And then B, what are some steps that, your community members can take if there is an elevated risk of allergy related illness? That's an example here. that you could actually take to reduce your risk of something like an allergy-related illness or heat-related illness, hunger, infectious diseases, all the things that we see that come along with severe, those higher stages of drought. And then the last page that we can kind of see right here are just example communications. So as you are, a public health practitioner, as you are writing copy for your social media post to go out to your community, or let's say you are writing a press release about the stage of drought, these are ways to kind of help you take some of those examples and that recommended messaging from that second page here on the messaging map, and then turning that into, an actual message that you're like looking at and saying, okay, I'm going to tailor this to my community, and I want to speak to my community about such health impact associated with drought. This just kind of gives a little bit of a model in ways you can do that, and then also very general examples of how could you turn this into an image, or how could you talk about this. And we do the same thing not only for public health providers, but we'll also do it in the document with health practitioners. So one of the health impacts of drought in a severe stage are mental health outcomes. So giving examples of how could, for example, a primary health care provider or a nurse talk to a patient about their current mental health status while there is a severe drought. Again, just finding ways to really open that line of communication and give examples. So I'll end it here because I know we're kind of getting close to time, but there were two main key takeaways really from this body of work that we really wanted to put out to folks, and that is public health and healthcare professionals are key partners in drought work. That's something that, in our group that we really are trying to work towards and making sure that they are have a seat at the table. And then second is translating drought and climate research into practical tools for the community is critical. It's so important that we are preparing folks for the health impacts of drought as we kind of see it becoming more and more prevalent. So I put QR codes here for each of these documents on the screen here, but I also think Amanda will throw both of these in the chat. Please give this a read. And then if you are someone who does work in that public health space or are a healthcare provider, one thing with the Drought and Health Toolkit is that, we kind of see this as a living document, and the more feedback and the more ideas that we get from the healthcare community, public health community, the more we will iteratively improve this document. So if you do have an interest in that, please take a look at it and send me. I think also Amanda will throw my email in the chat as well. Please feel free to send any feedback. We're really hoping this is a good first step in towards trying to make healthcare and public health communication around drought. So I'll end it there. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Summer. And I did add those links in your email to the chat already.
Thank you.
One question that came in for you that I'll ask you, and then I'll transition over to my final slide screen. I think this was during the roadmap part of the presentation, but I think it could apply maybe to either of them. Was there any discussion and or approaches to assessing the economic impacts related to drought and health?
Sure. So I think with our team, and Amanda, you are also an author on this, so please feel free to correct me at any point. But I think with our team, there was more of a health focus. Now, that's not to say that the economic impact doesn't affect one's health. It certainly can. I think that's probably as much as I can speak to that. However, I am happy to get more information from that team specifically to maybe build up a little bit more on that. I will say specifically for, yeah, I was just going to say, I will say specifically for the Drought and Health Framework. One of the things that we kind of talk about in particular is mental health impacts. And so I'm from Nebraska, right? And so we have a lot of agricultural workers, and that certainly drought can affect economics and lifestyles. And that's one thing that, did inform some of those mental health recommendations as well. And then Amanda, I'll let you add anything.
Yeah, the piece I was going to add is when we started with the roadmap, there was very, like, the topic of drought and health, like, people sort of knew the connections, but what were the actual, like, going through it more thoroughly, the assessment, the regionality of it. But people, even at the time, and there's more now going now, but when we started out, say 5-6 years ago, like, taking even the drought indicators and comparing them to what health data they had available locally or nationally, the correlations hadn't quite been done. So to do even that first step, which has been being done especially by folks at UNMC, is the first step, I think, to then take that thing and be like, okay, so we know this health related issue was related to drought, then we can go do maybe more of the economic studies and things like that. So we know it's one of the things that need to be done, but in the roadmap we probably outlined that's a way to go going forward. We just didn't have the methodologies or examples, I think, at the time, but there may be more now than there have been before. But yeah, there's just even some of that basic research is saying health impacts to what was going on with the drought, and the drought indicators at the time hadn't been done, and so we needed to catch up on that research, I think, before we even took it a step further. At least that's my thought. Summer, if you have anything to add.
No, I think that, yeah, that's about as much as I can add on that one.
Okay. At the time, and we're getting close to the end, I don't see any other questions. You have my email for folks on the screen. If you have any leftover questions, feel free to send them to me and I can give them to the speakers, or if they can't answer, someone who can. And so with that, I just want to say thank you for joining us today, and to all our great speakers. We hope you found this webinar informative. I'll mention again, and I put this links in the chat again, that a recording with a brief summary of this webinar will be on drought.gov later this week, and then separately the NIDIS YouTube recording on the NIDIS YouTube channel. Our next webinar is scheduled for September 23rd. The QR code up there again is just to be signed up for our listserv. So if you want the recording sent to you directly, or to sign up for the next webinar, make sure you sign up for the list if you're not on it already. And you can also find us through various social media channels and things like that. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar and hope you all have a great week.